My name's Jake Russo. I'm 33, and last week, I watched the empire I built from scratch, brick by brick, deal by deal, get handed to my brother like it was a slice of birthday cake. Why? Because, and I quote, he's got kids to feed. Let that sink in. Not because he earned it, not because he knew how to run it, but because he happened to reproduce. So I did the only thing I knew how to do when everything I'd worked for got ripped out from under me by the man who was supposed to teach me what integrity looks like. I walked away. No screaming, no courtroom drama, no public takedown. I just walked away and let the IRS do what the IRS does best. But if you think this is just about money, nah. This story is about bloodline, blind spot, and the kind of favoritism that gets passed down, like a family heirloom wrapped in guilt, tied with manipulation. If you've ever built something just to watch it get stolen by someone who never lifted a finger, hit that like button. And if your family ever made you feel invisible while praising the person who hurt you the most, drop a comment. I see you. Because to understand why I did what I did, why I watched my father's legacy go up in smoke and didn't even flinch, you need to go back to the beginning. You need to see what I saw. Growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in an old-school Italian household, meant three things were sacred: God, hard work, and family. In that order, unless it was Vincent. Then Vincent always came first. My dad, Antonio Russo, was the kind of man who smelled like lawn clippings, even in winter. He ran a landscaping business before I could spell the word. I grew up watching him operate heavy equipment like it was an extension of his spine: chainsaws, trenchers, backhoes. It was like ballet. Gritty, diesel-fueled ballet. I idolized him. When kids my age were playing Xbox, I was memorizing the pH tolerance of Kentucky bluegrass. By 12, I could rebuild a sprinkler manifold in the dark. By 16, I could survey a property with just a tape measure and a gut feeling. I was the weird landscaping prodigy, and I wore it like a badge of honor. But while I was learning the soil pH of 3 zip codes, my older brother Vincent was busy scrubbing the blue-collar stink off our last name. He was 4 years older and allergic to sweat. He'd tell people Dad was a landscape architect because calling him a landscaper sounded too manual, too real, too embarrassing for his prep school friends who spent summers at sailing camp and thought hedge trimmers were decorative. He mocked me for idolizing Dad. He mocked Dad for getting his hands dirty. And still he was the chosen one. It all started when Vincent was 15. He got T-boned by a drunk driver coming back from a party he never should have been at. Shattered femur, ruptured spleen, almost lost a kidney. He spent 3 months in the hospital, and Dad was there every single night. I was 9. I remember hearing Mom cry in the kitchen one morning, whispering, "He's never looked at either of them like that before." That moment broke something open in Dad. Vincent, in his hospital bed, afraid he might never walk again, became something sacred, fragile, untouchable. And me? I learned early that I was playing for second place in a race where the finish line kept moving. That favoritism wasn't loud, it was quiet. It was in the way Dad's eyes sparkled for Vincent's mediocre achievements and barely flickered for mine. It was in the little things, like the time I made varsity wrestling as a sophomore. That was a big deal at our school. Our wrestling team had state champions. ESPN covered. Scout. I trained for months. My coach said I was the most disciplined kid he'd seen in a decade. Mom was thrilled. Dad barely looked up from his phone. Say, "That's great. Son." Cool. Fine. I wasn't doing it for applause. My first match was Saturday night. I was hyped, ready to tear someone apart. Mom had to work a double shift at the nursing home, so I begged Dad to come watch it. He looked at the calendar and winced. I promised Vincent I'd help him move into his dorm. Mom wasn't having it. "That can wait till Sunday. This is important." He nodded. "You're right." But then, the night before my mat, Vincent showed up with that smug half smile. "It's my Independence Day." "Dad," he said, "I really need the try. This is our bonding time." And just like that, my father folded like a lawn chair in a thunderstorm. So I stood on the mat the next night, bleeding from my nose, ribs bruised, facing a kid who'd go on to wrestle D1, and I kept scanning the stands. I looked again and again for that face, the one that told me I mattered, that I wasn't just the runner-up to the golden child. Empty. Mid-round, my coach saw me looking and whispered, "Sometimes, you gotta fight alone." Kid. That hit harder than any takedown. I lost. Bad. When I got home, Dad was unloading boxes from the truck. Vincent walked in carrying pizza. Not a care in the world. Mom lost it, screaming mad, red-faced fury. Vincent just shrugged. His wrestling thing wasn't that big a deal anyway. I punched a hole in the drywall that night. Didn't even feel it. Mom found me icing my knuckles, sat down beside me. Didn't say a word, just held me. Sometimes that's all you need, someone who sees the wound without asking where it came from. That night, I stopped expecting applause, but I didn't stop building. Years later, I came back from college with a degree in horticulture and a chip on my shoulder the size of a wheelbarrow. I had idea, system, strategy. I was ready to take Dad's humble 3-man lawn crew and build something real. And I did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the moment everything broke wasn't when Daddy handed the company to Vincent. No. It was the moment he handed me a smile that said, "Thanks for the work. Now step aside. You want to know what I did next?" That's when things really got interesting. I came back home at 23. Diploma in one hand, toolbox in the other, and 100 ideas scribbled across the pages of the same old black spiral notebook my dad gave me when I was 12. The one with smudged graphite plan, faded measurement, and the oil stain shaped like Pennsylvania. It smelled like sun, sweat, and malt. I kept it close, my blueprint for proving I was more than second place. When I rejoined the company back then called Russo Lawn Services, it was 3 guys with dented pickups, a garage filled with rusted weed whackers, and a website that was basically just Dad's email signature. They had about 40 clients, mostly retirees with overgrown hedges and picky HOA committees. But I saw something else, a sleeping giant, buried under patchy sod and outdated invoices. While Dad still worked like he was 35, hopping on zero-turn mowers and correcting edging with a trowel, I started transforming the back end. I got us certified for commercial irrigation, pitched bids to business parks and gated community, learned how to speak the language of developers and city councils. We weren't just cutting grass anymore. We were curating space. At first, Dad didn't get it. He'd grumble, "You're making it too complicated. Jake, people just want their lawn green." And I'd say, "No, Dad, they want it alive." Then came Meridian Business Park. It was my first big swing, a 180,000 bid to overhaul the entire perimeter and central quad of a sprawling corporate complex on the edge of town. My hands were shaking when I handed over the proposal. Dad thought I'd lost my mind. "You quoted how much?" "Because we're worth it," I told him. And when we finished 2 weeks early and 15,000 under budget, the property manager called us the most professional crew he'd ever worked with. That contract led to 5 more. By 29, we were pulling $1.8 million in annual revenue, 35 employees, 18 truck, a full-time office manager, and an accountant. We had uniform, drone, a damn app for clients to schedule mulch installations. People started treating my dad differently too. Contractors who used to pretend he didn't exist at trade shows now shook his hand and asked for quotes. He'd beam with pride when people called us a powerhouse family brand. But only one name was on the paperwork: Antonio Russo. And only one name he ever mentioned to strangers was Vincent. See, while I was building that empire, Vincent was bouncing from marketing gigs to entrepreneurial experiments, trying to sell everything from protein powder to crypto consulting. And yet, every Sunday dinner, Dad would ask me about our billing system with one ear while bragging to guests about Vincent's networking skills. He called Vincent visionary. He called me steady, like I was a damn HVAC system, quiet and functional. It was subtle, but constant, like the time Big Mike, our foreman, 6'4", tattooed. Respected by every crew, raised a glass at the company picnic and toasted me for transforming Russo and Sons into something real. He said, "Jake's the kind of leader you want in the trenches with you." I watched my dad's jaw clench. He clapped. Sure. But his eyes said, "Don't get cocky, kid." That picnic was also when I saw something that told me the old rules were still very much in play. Dad had invited a city councilman we were trying to impress. Instead of letting me present our landscape design portfolio, the one I built, he handed it to Vincent, who'd shown up wearing loafers and Ray-Bans like he was headed to a yacht club. He butchered the pitch, called native plants regional weed. Still, Dad nodded approvingly. That night, I found the old notebook in my glove compartment, the one with the faded drawing of our original logo, and just stared at it. I thought, I've been building a house with no deed to my name. But I kept going, because I believed legacy was earned, not granted. Then came Danny. Danny Carter wasn't just an engineer, he was a design savant. We met when he contracted us for a small install on a luxury property he was renovating. We talked soil drainage over beer and pizza in the driveway. By the end of the project, I convinced Dad to bring him on as full-time landscape architect. Together, we landed 3 high-end residential deals and 2 green roof corporate projects. Suddenly, our brand wasn't just local, it was aspirational. Danny became more than a partner. He was like a brother, but the kind that actually gave a damn when I spoke. He'd say, "You don't just build yards, man. You build spaces people feel things in." I'll never forget when we finished the first luxury patio install, Brazilian hardwood. Recessed lighting, an integrated fire feature that glowed like moonlight. The homeowner cried, literally cried. Dad walked over, looked at it, and said, "Nice, but couldn't they just get a hot tub?" That was the night I started writing down everything I was doing: contracts, client lists, internal SOP, permits into a separate digital folder labeled, "In case I need to prove it." Still, I didn't stop hoping. Then came the video. For our 10-year rebrand celebration, I put together a sizzle reel, drone shots, before and after time-lapses, interviews with the crew, even client testimonials. I narrated the voiceover, talked about our journey, our grit, our growth. The team loved it. But at the event, Dad didn't play it. Instead, he stood up and introduced a slideshow Vincent had thrown together the night before. A 5-minute clip of Vincent walking through a garden holding a coffee mug, talking about vision alignment. I stood there, drink in hand, blood draining from my face. He called Vincent the future of Russo and Son. The team looked at me. Big Mike looked at me. Danny mouthed, "What the hell?" And Dad, he smiled like it made perfect sense. That night, I sat in the truck for 35 minutes before starting the engine. The notebook was on the passenger seat. I opened it to the first page, my 10-year-old handwriting scrawled beside a sketch of our old riding mower. And I realized something. It wasn't a legacy. It was a leash. And I was done wearing it. After the rebrand event, something inside me didn't just crack it, shifted, like a fault line, years in the making, finally letting go beneath the surface. From the outside, nothing changed. I still showed up at 6:30. Every morning, coffee in hand, notebook under my arm. Still walked job site. Still managed client, routed crews, checked invoices. But inside, I'd gone quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. The kind that means a storm is organizing itself. Danny noticed first. We were doing a walkthrough on a new commercial install. A boutique hotel wanting a rooftop green space. Usually I'd be geeking out over water retention systems or native perennials. That day, I just nodded, took measurements, barely said a word. When we got in the truck, he looked over and asked, "You good?" I shrugged. "I'm just tired." But it wasn't the kind of tired sleep fixes. It was the kind that comes from years of trying to earn something that was never yours to earn. Later that week, Dad called a team meeting. Big Mike, Dan, the foreman. Everyone packed into the main office. Dad stood at the front in his usual windbreaker and ball cap. acting like this was just another quarterly update. But then he dropped it. As of the end of this quarter, he said, I'll be transitioning day-to-day operations to Vincent, who'll be stepping in as managing partner. No build-up. No mention of my name. No recognition of the 10 years I'd bled for this business. I felt the words hit like cold water. First shock, then numbness. The room was dead silent. Danny blinked twice. Mike clenched his jaw. Vincent, standing by the back wall with that practiced casual smirk, gave a little nod. Like, yeah, this feels right. Dad went on, saying something about family continuity, about trusting Vincent's leadership style. He used corporate-sounding words that didn't fit in his mouth, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. When it was over, he looked directly at me and said, Jake, you'll still be integral to operations, but it's time to let your brother step up. Step up to what? He hadn't been there at 2A. When the irrigation line burst on the Monroe Plaza job. He hadn't calmed clients after scheduling errors or chased permits at City Hall or stayed up all night designing a native plant layout for the community rec center. But none of that mattered, because in Dad's world, Vincent's potential outweighed my history. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't flip the table. I stood, nodded once, walked out. I passed Vincent on the way to the door. He leaned in just enough and said under his breath, Don't worry. Lil bro, I'll take good care of it. Like I was handing over a toy truck. I drove straight to the river, parked in the gravel lot near the overlook. Wind was picking up, leaves skipping across the hood of my truck. The sky hung heavy like a curtain that wouldn't fall. I sat there, staring down at the water. That old black notebook lay on the passenger seat, the one I'd filled with sketches. Roots, Strategy's dream. It felt like a relic from a religion I didn't believe in anymore. Then I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring. Jake, you okay? I told her what happened. For the first time, I let it all out. Every piece of betrayal, every dim, every small moment I'd swallowed over the years. There was silence on her end. Then, I always knew this day would come. I just prayed it wouldn't break you. That word break stung, because something had broken, but not me. It was the illusion, the hope that if I just worked hard enough, if I just stayed humble, stayed loyal, I'd be chosen, seen, trusted. But this wasn't about work or loyalty. This was about narrative. And in my father's story, Vincent was the protagonist. I was just support staff. The next morning, I met Big Mike at our usual coffee spot. I didn't say much, just slid him the notebook across the table. He flipped through a few pages, then looked up. You serious? I nodded. You're walking away from everything. Not everything, I said. Just the lie. We talked for an hour. Then I texted Danny. Same conversation, same result. Within 48 hours, we had a plan. 5 crew leads, 2 project managers, 1 client account rep. All of them loyal to me, not the company name. We'd build our own thing, from the ground up. But first, I needed to say goodbye properly. The next day, I walked into the office early. The place was still quiet. Smelled like coffee and fertilizer and printer toner. I went to my old desk, took the notebook, placed it gently on top of the filing cabinet. On the inside cover, I left a note written in Sharpie. Returning the legacy. I'm building something that doesn't require me to be invisible. I placed Dad's old measuring tape on top of it, the one he gave me when I was 12. A symbol of where we started, and how far apart we'd grown. Then I walked out. No drama, no speech, just silence. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Me leaving quietly, letting them have what they wanted. But the thing about giving someone everything they think they deserve, and as they often realize, way too late, what they actually need. The week after I walked away, my phone lit up more than it had in months. Clients, crew, vendors. Some were confused, some were pissed, but most were just quiet for a beat, and then said, "You starting something new?" I never answered directly, just said, "You'll know when it's ready." Truth was, we were already building it. I called it Ironwood Studios, not landscaping or design and build. Studios. Because this time, it wasn't just about planting shrubs or laying pavers. It was about crafting environment, spaces people felt proud to live in, walk through, celebrate birthdays in. It wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about creation. Danny handled design. Big Mike managed operation. We worked out of Danny's garage for the first month. Whiteboards leaning against lawn chairs. Plans spread across an old ping-pong table. It was chaotic, but it was ours. I maxed out my personal credit line. Took out a small business loan using my truck as collateral. It was a risk, a real one. But there's a strange kind of freedom that comes from burning the bridge yourself. No one can push you back across. We launched with a single Instagram post. A time-lapse of a drought-tolerant, multi-tiered backyard install we'd done months earlier. No branding, no voiceover, just the work. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with a DM from a former Russo client. Did you leave? We want you. Not the name. That message changed everything. Within the first week, 5 former clients reached out, then 10, then a commercial developer, Vincent. He didn't even know we were operational yet. But here's the thing about replacing a guy who built your system. You don't know what you don't know. And Vincent didn't know anything. He tried to play boss like it was a costume. Wore polos with our old company logo like they gave him instant credibility. Showed up to site meetings late. Gave vague instructions. Tried to charm clients with buzzwords like urban flow and eco-synergy. It backfired fast. One longtime client, the Birchwood HOA, canceled their annual contract after Vincent missed 3 appointments and forgot to order seasonal plants for their front signage. They called me privately and said, "We stuck with Russo because of you. Now that you're gone, well, we'd like to follow." And they did. So did 2 others. By month 2, Russo & Sons had lost 40% of their recurring client. Meanwhile, we at Ironwood were holding weekly team dinners in Danny's backyard, taking turns cooking. There was laughter, energy, and something I'd never felt in my father's company. Ease. But I wasn't done. Not yet. See, there's a certain point where the story isn't about winning anymore. It's about making things visible. What had been swept under the rug needed to be seen by more than just me. And Vincent, he was about to trip over every thread I left sticking out. Let me tell you how Russo & Sons did accounting. Messily. Always had. Dad hated paperwork. Avoided tech. He relied on verbal approvals, sticky notes, and a shoebox full of receipts at tax time. But I'd cleaned it up, set up QuickBooks, hired an actual bookkeeper, made us audit-proof. I even documented a full payment and reporting process that Vincent ignored the moment I left. Within weeks, I started hearing whispers from vendors. Unpaid invoices. Bounced checks. Vincent had started cutting corners, delaying payments to preserve cash flow. Which was code for, I don't know what I'm doing. Worse, he started altering invoices, marking up supplies by 30%, but billing clients as if it were base cost. Using discounts as leverage in verbal agreements, no paper trail. A friend of mine, Sarah, who worked as a procurement lead for one of our old clients, called me. "Hey Jake, did you guys ever charge us for reclaimed stonework on that Parkview project?" "No. We used their existing material." "Why?" "We just got a $12 Sun invoice from Russo. Says it's leftover fees from last year." I paused. "Want me to send you our original scope of work?" "Yeah, please." "And Jake, I trust you." "We don't trust them anymore." That's when the other shoe dropped. A week later, Sarah's company filed a formal complaint. And when you're operating in a government-regulated district like Parkview, where landscaping contracts are partially reimbursed through public sustainability grants, you don't get to fake line items. The city got involved. Then came the IRS. I heard about the audit through a guy named Ruben, one of our old crew leads who stayed at Russo after I left, but kept in touch. They're sweating. Man. IRS flagged 2 contracts, asking about missing inventory and vendor inconsistencies. Vincent's blaming temp workers. I asked, "Where's my dad in all this?" Ruben laughed bitterly, playing dumb, saying he thought you still handled finances. Can you believe that? I could, and yet, it still stung, because even with his world falling apart, he'd rather paint me as the ghost accountant than admit the son he rejected had built his safety net. But I wasn't angry. I was calm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing his validation. I was just watching the tower he refused to maintain collapse under its own arrogance. One morning, around 7, my phone buzzed. Dad? I let it ring. Then ring again. Voicemail came through. Jake, we need to talk. Your brother's in trouble. The company, it's not good. If you could just come by, maybe help him fix it. For the family. I replayed that message twice, then opened the audio app and recorded a reply. I left everything you needed to succeed in that black notebook. On top of the file cabinet, page 17 explains cash flow tracking. Page 22 has the vendor contract procedure. Page 31 outlines how to avoid the exact mistakes you're now calling me about. I didn't take anything from you, Dad. I gave it back. All of it. And then I pressed send. You know, people think revenge has to be loud, that it's a courtroom battle or a public takedown. But sometimes it's just walking away with your dignity and letting incompetence do the rest. And believe me, incompetence never disappoints. There's something almost surgical about watching a structure collapse in slow motion, especially when you know exactly which beam was faulty. I didn't gloat. Didn't throw a party when Russo and Sons started hemorrhaging clients. Didn't post on socials when their trucks stopped showing up on job sites. But I watched, and I remembered everything. Meanwhile, Ironwood Studios. My new baby was thriving. We landed a $450,000 multi-phase commercial contract in just our 3rd month, thanks to a single detail: trust. Clients didn't care that we weren't a legacy brand. They cared that when we said Tuesday, we showed up Monday night. We didn't cut corners. We cut noise. By fall, we'd expanded from Danny's garage to a leased warehouse space with a design showroom up front and a crew hub in back. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. Honest, the kind of place where no one had to pretend to be visionary. But even as Ironwood bloomed, I kept tabs on Russo and Sons. Ruben, still friendly, fed me quiet updates. Vincent had tried to modernize the brand by hiring a digital marketing firm. He dumped $30 Alvin into SEO ad, flashy graphic, and a rebrand video where he described himself as a landscape innovator. The comments were brutal. Weren't y'all the ones who ghosted our HOA last season? You spelled botanical wrong in the title. Then came the kicker. Vincent tried to poach Danny. Sent him an email that started with, "You and I both know who really made that company run." Danny forwarded it to me, followed by, "Do I get a raise for not punching him through my screen?" I doubled his salary. We laughed, but only for a second, because what came next wasn't funny. Vincent, desperate to stay afloat, started slashing prices, overbooking crew, and skipping permits to save time. That's when the lawsuits started rolling in. A retaining wall collapsed at a high-end property in Sycamore Hills. Turns out he used unlicensed subcontractors to save on insurance. Then, a sprinkler system backed up and flooded the crawl space of a daycare center because he hadn't reviewed city water main schematic. Clients sued, vendors sued. Even employees sued over unpaid wages. And all of it, every last ripple, could have been avoided if someone had just opened that damn black notebook. But they didn't. Instead, my father called me again. 3 missed calls in one day. Then a text. "Vincent's thinking about filing for bankruptcy. Can we meet?" Just to talk. I stared at that message for 5 full minutes. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure I felt anything anymore. The ache that had lived under my ribs for years, the hunger to be chosen, was just gone. That night, I met Mom for dinner. She asked how things were going. I told her the truth. Ironwood was busy, honest, beautiful, and I was okay. Then she asked, gently, "Would you regret it if he lost everything?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, same as Dad's used to be. Same rough skin, same line. But the difference? Mine were building something with integrity. His were now clawing to keep something built on favoritism, silent, and denial. No, I finally said. I wouldn't regret it. I just wish it hadn't taken this much pain for him to see what he had. The next morning, a manila envelope showed up at Ironwood's office. No return address. Inside, a single page, a formal offer from Antonio Russo to buy into Ironwood as a silent partner. With strategic oversight for multi-generational expansion, there was a handwritten note stapled to the back. Jake, let's rebuild. Together. This time, right. I sat with that note for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. An attempt to buy his way back into a legacy he never truly understood. I passed the paper to Danny. He read it, blinked, then handed it back. What are you gonna do? I took a breath. Something he never expected. That Friday, I scheduled a lunch with Vincent. Neutral spot. Public. Safe. He showed up in a blazer that didn't fit. Wearing sunglasses indoors. Still posturing. I let him talk first. He rambled about stress, betrayal, how Dad left me hanging, and how I should have stepped in to help the family brand. I didn't flint. When he paused, I leaned forward and asked, "Do you remember the Monroe Plaza project?" He looked confused. Kinda. That was the one you took credit for in that magazine interview. He smirked. We needed the exposure. You weren't gonna chase PR anyway. I nodded. You're right. I don't chase PR, but I do chase truth. Then I slid a folder across the table. Inside, copies of every formal complaint, unpaid invoice, permit violation, and lawsuit Russo & Sons was currently facing pulled from public record. I didn't leak these, I said, but someone will. His face drained. I continued. You can do one of two things. Shut the company down and salvage what little dignity Dad has left, or try to ride this out and drag him down with you. He opened his mouth. I cut him off. Either way, I'm not coming back. I'm not bailing you out, but I am making sure everyone you lied to knows who built what. He didn't speak. Just nodded. Once, shaking it, I stood up, turned to leave. But just before I stepped away, I said, tell Dad I got his offer, and tell him legacy doesn't work like inheritance. It works like trust. And he spent his... That night, I burned the original black notebook. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need it anymore. The legacy wasn't on the pages. It was in my hand, my work, my team. And we weren't just surviving. We were building. 6 months after the Russo collapse, I walked through Ironwood's latest job site, an urban rooftop in downtown Cincinnati. The crew was finishing up the last installation. Native grasses, LED path lighting, a Japanese maple I handpicked with the client. It was sunset, and the sky bled copper and gold across the mirrored windows of the skyline. I stood there, soil still on my hand, watching the lights flicker on across the terrace like quiet applause. It felt right. But peace has a strange way of being interrupted when you've lived too long inside other people's storms. That night, I got a call from Mom. Jake, your father's in the hospital. A long pause. He collapsed during a deposition. Stress-related. They're monitoring his heart. I didn't say anything for a moment. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't figure out what part of me was still his son, and what part had finally severed itself clean. He's asking for you, she added quietly. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I showed up the next day, walked into that white-walled hospital room filled with the beep and hush of machines and low conversations. Dad looked smaller, older. Not the man who barked orders across job sites or tightened bolts on broken mower decks with his bare hands. He looked like a man who'd lost more than money. When he saw me, he tried to sit up. I stopped him with a hand gesture, sat in the chair. For a moment, we just breathed in the same space. Then, softly, you were right. I didn't respond. I should have let you lead. I should have seen it sooner. Still, I said nothing. Because apologies after the fire are like garden hoses at a funeral too late to matter. He reached for something on the table next to him. A faded photo. The original crew from Russo's first summer, me at 14, holding a rake too big for my hand. Vincent wasn't in the picture. This was the last time I felt proud without being afraid, he whispered. And that landed hard, because even now, as he sat there, cracked open by his own decisions, he still didn't fully grasp what he'd done to me, to the company, to trust itself. But I didn't come to punish it. I came for closure. You always looked past me, I said, like I was invisible until something broke. And then I was convenient. He didn't deny it. I thought love was supposed to be earned through obedience. But maybe it's just supposed to be given. That was closer to something real. We didn't hug, didn't cry, but we sat there. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a war of silence. Just two men finally realizing they'd built everything except a bridge between them. After that, I didn't visit again. Not because I held a grudge, but because I didn't need more closure. I had enough. Vincent. He took a payout from the final sale of Russo & Sons assets, about 15% of what the company had been worth a year ago. Last I heard, he moved to Austin to consult for startup green tech companies, which I'm pretty sure means he's back to pitching half-baked ideas over overpriced brunches. He tried to friend me on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago. I deleted the request. As for Ironwood, we got shortlisted for a state sustainability award. One of our projects turned a former parking lot into a pollinator corridor for a local elementary school. The ribbon-cutting ceremony had third graders releasing butterflies into the air. I cried. Danny clapped me on the back and said, "See? This is what you were always meant to build. Not empire. Impact." That same day, we received a letter from a client we'd never worked with. She wrote, "I saw how you treated your crew. That's why I want to hire you. Not for the plants, for the culture." And just like that, I knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation, reclaiming identity, integrity, worth. A week later, I got one more unexpected visit. Mom showed up at the office with a worn shoebox in her hands. Inside, the charred remains of the original black notebook. She'd found it half burned in the backyard fire pit after I left it there. She smiled gently. "I kept it. Figured someday you'd want proof that even ashes have stories." Inside, the corner of a page still bore the sketch I drew as a kid. A mower on a hill, clouds shaped like question mark. On the back, in shaky pencil, I'd written, "Someday, I'll build something that no one can take away." And here I was. But just when I thought the past had settled, the receptionist poked her head in. "Jake, there's a woman here. Says she's a contractor you used to work with." She brought document. "Something about ownership fraud." I blinked. "Fraud," she says. "It's about Russo & Sons. Something about your name still being on a dormant business license." I stood slowly, heart not racing but alert. Because just when you think the past is done clawing at your heels, it finds one last nail to drag across the floor. The woman in the lobby wore a faded Carhartt jacket, work boots, and had sawdust in her hair. She looked like she'd just stepped off a job site, which, it turns out, she had. Her name was Rosa Delgado. Independent contractor, dryscape specialist. We'd crossed paths years ago on a municipal playground install when I was still at Russo & Sons. Rosa didn't waste time. "Jake," she said, holding out a manila envelope. "Your name is still on the original incorporation docs for Russo & Sons. Pre-LLC restructuring. They never filed the revocation form." I frowned. Vincent swore he handled that, said the business had fully transitioned. She gave a small, almost pitying laugh. "Yeah, he said that. But last month, I got a lien notice in the mail. Turns out, Russo subcontracted my team for a library courtyard project, then stiffed me on the last 40%. And guess what? Name's on the original city permit." My stomach sank. "Ah, mine." She nodded. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside were copies of city filing, unpaid invoices, and one damning detail. Russo & Son, Inc. had submitted documentation using my digital signature, a forgery, and the cherry on top. The fraud had allowed Vincent to underbid competitors by using my reputation, the license, and trust I'd built before leaving. Rosa tilted her head. I'm not suing you. Jake, I know this wasn't you, but your name's on it, and someone's going to. You need to get in front of this. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city humming outside the window like it didn't care whose life was unraveling. This wasn't just one more mess. This was criminal. And it put everything Ironwood's reputation, my ability to hold a contractor's license, even my liability insurance at risk. I had two options: lawyer up and fight it quietly behind the scenes. Go public, expose the fraud. Draw a hard line between me and Russo once and for all. It wasn't an easy choice, but I'd spent too long in shadows under Vincent's smirk, under Dad's disappointment, under the weight of being second. So this time, I picked the sun. The next day, I sat with a reporter from the local business journal. Her name was Melody Shaw, sharp eyes, sharper pen. She'd covered Russo and Son's rise back in the day and had since pivoted to integrity and business stories. I gave her everything. The notebook history, the ownership split, the manipulation, the forgery. She listened, nodded, asked the right questions. Then she said, "Do you realize this story isn't just about fraud? Jake, it's about inheritance gone toxic. About the myth that family automatically means loyalty." I sat with that, because she was right. So many people cling to broken system, hoping blood will outweigh betrayal. But sometimes, it's the strangers who protect your name better than the ones who gave it to you. The article dropped 3 days later. Legacy or liability? How one builder reclaimed his name after family betrayal. It didn't go viral, but it went far enough. Clients, vendors, friends, people reached out with support, with relief, with their own story. One message stood out. You may have lost a last name, but you built a first-class name. Another said, Ironwood didn't just build our backyard. You built my faith in people again. The fallout hit fast. Vincent was subpoenaed. Dad was called in to testify. Turns out, he had seen the documents, but hadn't understood the legal weight. When asked on record why he didn't alert me, he said, I didn't think Jake would want the drama. He seemed like he was finally happy. Funny how they only start recognizing your peace after they've burned your name into the ground. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. Just distant. So I did one last thing. Filed an official name change for the old corporation. Not to mine, not to Ironwood. Just dissolved. A clean break. Then I took my crew on a 3-day retreat to the mountains. No phone, no email, just firewood, trail hikes, and bad poker games under the stars. On the last night, Danny handed me a small box. Inside, a replica of the old black notebook. But this time, the cover was embossed with gold letters. Legacy is not inherited. It's earned. I didn't cry. But I did sit very still, watching the firelight flicker across the leather, feeling every scar on my past glow a little less sharp. You asked me what the lesson is, what I'd want someone else to take from all this. It's simple. Sometime, the people who plant you don't water you. Sometime, you have to replant yourself, tear out the rot, build your own trellis. And if they call it betrayal, let them. You're not here to carry their version of you. You're here to build something no one can take away. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever been underestimated, manipulated, or ghosted by someone who was supposed to believe in you, drop a comment. Tell me your story. You never know who needs to hear it. And if you're out there trying to build something with your own hands and your own heart, keep going. Your name doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to you. End of story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's breaking cycles too. Story 2. My name is Lucas DeSantis. I'm 33 years old. And a few months ago, I watched my father hand over the entire landscaping empire I built my life's work to my older brother. Why? Because Vincent has kids to feed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. I just smiled, stood up, and walked out. But if you think this is just another sob story about being the overlooked son, Think again. This isn't a pity party. This is about legacy, justice, and a quiet kind of revenge. See? There's something my father forgot. I may not be the favorite, but I'm the one who made that company worth fighting over. I was born in Sacramento, California, to an old-school Italian father who believed in hard work, quiet dinners, and never wasting a good Sunday on rest. My dad, Anthony Tony DeSantis, was the kind of man who always smelled faintly of wet soil and gasoline. He could fix anything with duct tape and a prayer, and he ran a 3-man lawn care outfit since before I could speak full sentences. I used to follow him around as a toddler with a plastic rake in my hand, mimicking everything he did. By 6, he let me dig alongside him with my own spade. That spade and old, rusting thing with a splintered wood handle became a kind of talisman for me, a symbol, a promise. One day this will be mine. But if you think this is a story about a father grooming his son to take over the family business, you're wrong. That story belonged to Vincent, my older brother, the golden child. He was everything I wasn't: charismatic, athletic, polished. The kind of guy who wore designer polos to family cookouts and never had dirt under his nails. The guy who told people Dad was a landscape architect because gardener sounded too blue-collar. He hated the business. Mocked it, actually. Growing up, he refused to mow our own lawn. Wouldn't lift a shovel unless it was a golf club. I still remember Mom trying to guilt him into helping trim hedges and him saying, "I have SAT prep. Lucas likes that kind of stuff anyway." Then came the accident. He was 15, hit by a drunk driver on his way back from a party he shouldn't have been at. Broken leg, internal bleeding, 3 months in the hospital. And just like that, my father's heart, this gruff, sun-leather, stone-cold man, cracked open like an egg. He never left Vincent's side. He brought him Italian subs every day, massaged his legs during physical therapy, whispered encouragement like a damn motivational speaker. That night, Vincent had a panic attack. Dad sat up with him until 4 a.m., whispering over and over, "You'll walk again. You'll walk again." I was 9. I watched from the hallway. Forgot, holding a cup of tea Mom had asked me to bring. It went cold in my hands. Something broke that night, not just in Vincent's body, but in the way our father saw him. From then on, Vincent could do no wrong. Even when he mocked the business, even when he moved out and ghosted us for 2 years in college, even when he skipped Mom's 50th birthday for a networking mixer. Me, I got a participation ribbon for existing. I tried. Though, God, I tried. In high school, I made varsity wrestling as a sophomore. Big deal at our school. Legendary coach, packed bleachers, screaming parents. I was so excited I could barely sleep the night before my first match. Mom was working a double shift at the hospital. "But Dad, I needed him there," I asked. He hesitated, said he already promised to help Vincent move into his college dorm that same weekend. Mom wasn't having it. "That dorm can wait. This is important." Dad grunted. "We'll see." But of course, the night before the match, Vincent worked his magic. He cried about how this was his Independence Day, how he needed Dad's truck, how he couldn't do it without him. Cue the guilt trip. Cue the folding. The next night, as I stood on the mat under those glaring gymnasium lights, I scanned the bleachers for my dad. Empty. Round after round, I fought like hell. But my mind wasn't in it. I got pinned hard in the third. Coach slapped my shoulder after and said, "Sometimes you gotta fight alone." Kid. That sentence stayed with me longer than any bruise, because it was true. Later that night, I walked into the house. Mom was already yelling, "Where the hell were you?" Dad mumbled something about helping your brother. Vincent strolled in behind him, pizza boxes in hand. Casual as hell. "Lucas's wrestling thing. Not that big a deal anyway," he said, biting into a slice. I went to my room and punched a hole in the drywall. Mom didn't scold me. She found me icing my knuckles with a bag of frozen peas. She just hugged me. Tight. Didn't say a word. Sometimes silence says everything. You'd think that would have been the end of it. But in a way, it was just the beginning. After high school, Vincent went to some fancy 4-year business program. Ended up marrying a pediatrician from a wealthy family. No kids yet. But that didn't stop Dad from acting like Vincent was carrying on the DeSantis bloodline solo. Me, I went to community college for horticulture and landscape design. Then came home, rolled up my sleeve, and got to work. Dad's company at the time was small. 3 guys, 2 trucks, maybe 40 clients. By the time I was 24, we were bidding commercial contracts, handling municipal irrigation, and landing deals Dad never dreamed of. I brought in a foreman named Big Mike Think Paul Bunyan with an attitude and a designer named Danny Castellano who made backyards look like magazine covers. We grew fast. By year fun, we had 35 employees, 18 trucks, and a waiting list of clients. Revenue hit $8 million. Dad still called it my little lawn service. Still said, "We're just lucky the economy's good." Still said, "Vincent's got mouths to feed." One night, Dad called a family meeting. We sat in the break room at HQ. Fluorescents buzzing. My hand smelled like engine oil. He cleared his throat. Said he was getting older. Said he needed to start thinking about the future. Said it made sense to transfer ownership. To Vincent? I blinked. To Vincent. Vincent. He's got a family to support, Dad said. I stared at the man who taught me how to lay sprinkler lines in clay soil. The man who let me bleed for this company. And all he could say was, "Vincent has kid. But here's the part that still stings like acid. Vincent didn't even want it." He looked up from his phone and said, "Sure, if it makes things easier." Just like that. I didn't yell. Didn't flip a table. I just stood up, walked outside, and pulled that old rusted spade, the one from when I was 6, off the wall in the workshop. Held it in my hands. And I smiled, because in that moment, I knew what had to be done. Next time your father hands your legacy to a man who's never dirtied his hands, ask yourself this: what burns faster, a bridge or an empire? I didn't go back the next day, or the one after that. My keycard still worked. I could have walked in, sat at my desk, and started budgeting out our spring season like nothing happened. But instead, I took the long way home, spent hours driving through back roads lined with oak trees and early autumn dust. I parked at the edge of the old county reservoir and stared at the water until the sky turned purple. I kept the spade with me, the one with the chipped wooden handle and a smear of orange rust near the base. I found it in my truck's back seat, half buried under contractor invoices and faded gloves. Holding it made something in my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid, when I still believed hard work earned respect. That night, I placed it in the center of my dining table. Didn't touch it again, just stared, for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, Big Mike showed up at my door. Didn't call first, didn't knock gently. Just banged once and walked in like he always had. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, looking at me like I'd committed a felony. "You ghosting me now," he grunted. I looked down. "You heard?" I heard Vince walked in, wearing cologne and talking about synergy. That's not landscape leadership. That's LinkedIn nonsense. I tried to laugh. Fail. Mike stepped further in, eyed the spade on my table, and nodded slowly. "I remember when your dad gave you that. You were what, 6, 7? 6. I said. He told me if I kept it clean, I'd earn the right to use the real tools. You never stopped cleaning it, Mike said. Then he sat down across from me and dropped his voice. "Listen, I've been with your dad 22 years, but I've only ever worked for one DeSantis, and it wasn't Tonin. The truth is, the team didn't follow me because I had a last name. They followed me because I led, because when a pipe burst in freezing rain, I was there in the mud with them. Because when the city fined us for permit, I drove to the courthouse myself and fixed it. Because I was the one who brought Danny on board. The one who negotiated every high-end residential contract. The one who turned our tiny lawn care company into a trusted brand with repeat clients and 5-star reviews. Vincent once asked if sod came pre-cut. Danny called later that evening. His voice was calm, as always, but there was an edge under it. I'm assuming you've heard about the change in ownership. Yeah. They sent me a new contract, he said. Same pay. But all design proposals need executive review. Executive meaning Vince, apparently. I could almost hear him raise an eyebrow through the phone. You know I've got offers elsewhere, Lucas. But I'd rather stay. With you. Wherever that is. It hit me then. Harder than I expected. They weren't just taking my company. They were trying to erase me from my own legacy. And not just me, everything I'd built. Every person I'd mentored. Every standard I'd raised. Gone. Rewritten under Vincent's shiny new management style. But this is where it gets worse. Because Vince didn't want the company. Not really. He wanted the image. At the county business awards that fall, he showed up in a navy blazer and pocket square, shaking hands like a congressman, smiling like he'd built this empire himself. In his speech, he used words like entrepreneurial vision and market expansion, things he didn't even understand. They even printed a feature in the Regional Contractors Digest, calling him the new face of sustainable design. The headline read, Vincent DeSantis, Innovating Tradition. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I did what I always do. I listened, I waited, I observed, and I noticed something interesting. Clients weren't happy. Permits weren't getting filed right. Timelines were slipping. Big Mike said invoices were bouncing, and vendors were getting frustrated. And the worst part, Vince didn't care. He kept pushing the residential division to do luxury patios for social media clout, ignoring our bread-and-butter commercial contracts. Then one afternoon, Mike called me. Furia. You're not going to believe this, he said. Vince just tried to cancel the irrigation upgrades at the Meridian Business Park. I sat up straight. Those are mandatory compliance install. They're tied to city rebates. Yeah. Well, he said they were low ROI. Told the client we're shifting to boutique projects. You know what the manager said? He asked where you were. That night, I sat with Danny and Mike at a diner off I-80. We didn't talk for a while. Just sipped coffee and let the silence breathe. Then I said it. I'm walking. I mean it. I'm out. Danny raised an eyebrow. You already walked? No. I mean, I'm starting over. From zero. You in? Mike leaned back. You leave. We follow. Danny nodded. I'll get started on the LLC paperwork tomorrow. We called it True Roots Landscaping. Symbolic. Grounded. Clean. We rented a tiny office behind an auto shop. Bought 2 used trucks. Reached out to 5 former clients. Within 3 weeks, we had 12 jobs lined up. Within 6, we had 32 men. Within 8 we got a call from the Meridian Business Park. We're terminating our contract with DeSantis Landscaping. The manager said, Can you take over? I paused, then said, Let me get back to you. Because here's the thing. I didn't just want clients back. I wanted to rebuild something that couldn't be taken from me again. Something built not just from grass and gravel, but from principles. But the real turn, that came when Danny handed me a manila folder. Inside, copies of expense report, vendor note, design invoices, all signed off by Vincent. All clearly manipulated to make his division appear more profitable than it was. Danny looked me dead in the eye. Tell me when you're ready. And just like that, the war became real, because I wasn't just rebuilding anymore. I was going to let him bury himself with his own arrogance, his own paperwork, and his own damn signature. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. And the IRS, they love the truth when it's attached to falsified tax filing. But before I pulled the trigger, I needed one last thing. Closure, which meant going back to where it all started, to the house with the tool shed, to the man who gave me a shovel at 6 and stabbed me with a signature at 33. And what I found in that house changed everything. The old house hadn't changed much. Same creaky porch swing, same cracked driveway with oil stains from a truck Dad sold 10 years ago. Even the wind chimes still hung by the kitchen window, clinking like ghosts that refused to leave. I stood at the edge of the walkway for a long moment, the manila folder tucked under my arm, heart thudding in a slow angry rhythm. And I told myself I was only here for closure. But what I found inside, that nearly broke me. Mom answered the door. Her face lit up like a flickering bulb, half joy, half pain. "Lucas," she breathed, pulling me in. It's been too long. It had only been a few weeks, but time bends when betrayal's in the air. We sat at the kitchen table. The same one where I used to do math homework while Dad cleaned his boots. The same one where Vincent got his acceptance letter to college and Dad toasted with whiskey. I looked at my mother. She looked tired, older than I remembered. "Is he here?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "In the shed." Of course he was. His sanctuary. His fortress of wood, oil, and silence. I stepped into the backyard and crossed the brittle grass. The shed stood like a relic, all flaking red paint and warped cedar panels. I pushed the door open and smelled sawdust, rust, and the sharp bite of metal. Dad didn't look up. He was oiling hedge clippers like it was a normal Tuesday. "You here to yell?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm past that." He kept working. "Then what?" I didn't answer, just looked around. And that's when I saw it, my old spade. He'd mounted it on the wall. A frame had been built around it. Polished. Label: Lucas, age 6. First tool. My throat tightened. "You framed it?" I asked. He finally looked at me. His face was stone, but his eyes, those damned eyes, held something fragile. "You earned it," he said. I wanted to scream. "Then why didn't you give me what I earned?" "Instead," I asked, "why did you give it all to Vincent?" He set the clippers down. "Because he needed it more." That was it. The old, infuriating mantra. He has kids. He needs stability. And I don't. I shot back. "You think I don't need security? You think I don't deserve recognition because I don't have a family?" He sighed. "Lucas, no. Answer me. I built that company. I brought in every major contract. I kept your name relevant. And you handed it to someone who still calls it yard work behind your back." He winced. "Just barely. I thought you didn't care about legacy," he said softly. And that hit harder than I expected, because maybe, just maybe, I hadn't made myself clear enough. I left without slamming the door. Didn't yell. Didn't cry. But inside, something cracked clean through. For all my effort, for all the sweat and nights spent calculating payroll and zoning requirements, I was still invisible to the man who'd taught me how to grip a shovel. He hadn't picked Vincent because of love. He'd picked him because of fear. Fear that Vincent, the fragile one, would fall apart without help. Fear that I'd survive either way. And maybe I wouldn't, but that didn't make it fair. That week, Vince started his campaign. He brought in a PR guy, started rebranding DeSantis Landscaping as Green Line Solutions. New logo, sleek black uniforms, buzzwords like eco-forward and luxury irrigation. It made me sick. Danny showed me their new website. Vincent's photo was front and center, founder and CEO. It said, no mention of me, no mic, no legacy, just polished teeth and stolen credit. But the real insult came 2 days later. I was out surveying a job site when Mike texted me. "Check this." It was a flyer, printed and mailed to old clients. Under new leadership, introducing Greenline, the future of outdoor design. It had Vince's face on it again and a testimonial. From my father. "My son Vincent is the future of our family's business." I couldn't be more proud. I read it 5 times. Each time, something inside me went colder. So I made a decision. It wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about getting back at Vincent. It was about correcting the record. If they were going to rewrite history, then I was going to publish the footnotes. Loudly, legally, and with receipts. Danny and I sat down with a tax attorney, someone neutral, someone clean. We showed her the folder. Padded invoices, false expenses, redirections of labor hours to personal projects. Vince had been using company funds to build an outdoor entertainment space at his home, then billing it under a fake client name. The attorney raised an eyebrow. "This is felony level. You know that, right?" I'm not looking to destroy him, I said. She paused. Could have fooled me. I just want the truth to win, I said. For once, she slid the folder back toward me. Then you'll need more than this. So we started collecting. Mike tracked payroll inconsistencies. Danny compared a project log. I made quiet calls to vendors people I knew from the old days. I asked careful questions, and what we found, it was worse than we thought. Vincent wasn't just sloppy, he was criminally negligent. He'd submitted fake bids to inflate performance, forged Danny's signature on several design contracts, and worst of all, he'd quietly laid off half the seasonal crew to fund his marketing campaign. That broke me, because I'd hired some of those guys myself. They were single dads, recent immigrants, former inmates trying to go straight, hard-working men who'd taken a chance on us, and Vincent tossed them like scrap paper. To fund branding, it was no longer about business. This was war. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the framed spade now hanging in my workshop, and I remembered something Mike once said. When someone burns your name, you don't just clean it up, you engrave it in steel. And I intended to, starting now. The first step wasn't revenge, it was precision. You don't walk into war swinging a shovel, you study the terrain. You map the mines. Then you step where it hurts the most. Danny, Mike, and I had been compiling evidence for weeks. Invoices, altered timestamp, ghost client names. Everything Vincent had touched reeked of ego and shortcut. But knowing something and proving it are two different beasts. So we broke it down like a project install. Blueprint, timeline, execution. And we had a hell of a blueprint. I started with a manila folder. But this time, I made 3 copies, one for the tax attorney, one for the state licensing board, and one for someone Vince would never see coming, his own banker. I still remembered the loan manager at Pacific Horizon Credit Union. I'd gone fishing with his brother-in-law once on Lake Berryessa. The guy liked rules, loved protocol. I sent him a polite, anonymous package with a short note. You may want to review these against the terms of your active business credit accounts with Green Line Solutions. Then we waited. Mike made calls to the seasonal workers Vincent fired. At first, a few were hesitant. Nobody wants to burn bridges in this industry. You never know when you'll need a paycheck. But once we offered them spots with true roots, under fair pay and better hours, their mouths loosened. One guy, Armando, had screenshots of texts from Vince. Don't log that work order. Bill it under the Fulton Project. City won't chat. Another, Jalen, had photos of Vince's backyard renovation equipment from our inventory. Company trucks parked outside on weekend. It was no longer just sketchy. It was fraud. Still, something didn't sit right with me. I wasn't sleeping much. My jaw ached from grinding my teeth in my sleep. Every time I looked at the framed spade on my wall, I felt torn between the boy who wanted to be his father's pride and the man who was done being invisible. Then one night, I got a call from my mom. You need to come over, she said, voice low. Is Dad okay? No. And yes. Just come. He was in the living room, half watching the news, half staring at nothing. His shoulders looked smaller, spine curved like a tired tree. Lucas, he said without turning. I read the letter you sent the bank. I froze. How'd you know it was me? He gave a dry laugh. You think I don't recognize your language after 30 years? I sat across from it. The silence stretched like wet cement between us. He finally spoke. I thought giving it to Vincent would give him purpose, stability, something to grow into. You gave him power he didn't earn, I said, and he used it to rip everything apart. He nodded, slowly. I know. The words hung heavy in the room. And then just when I thought I'd heard it all, he said something I never expected. I made a mistake. Those 4 words, that's all it took to punch the air out of my lung. My father, the man who never admitted to being wrong about anything, had finally seen the wreckage for what it was. But I wasn't here for an apology. I was here for resolution. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Are you willing to fix it? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled out a weathered folder. Inside, original ownership document, the transfer papers, and a notarized clause I'd never seen. In the event of performance negligence or ethical breach, full managerial control may revert to the former operational lead. My jaw tightened. You built in a safety clause. He looked at me. I built it in for you, in case Vincent collapsed. I didn't think it'd happen this fast. Armed with that clause, we called a meeting. Not just any meeting, a formal board review. Greenline's board was mostly figureheads, but 2 members were long-standing contractors I'd worked with back in the early days. They remembered who brought in the big accounts, who wrote the proposals, who actually showed up. And when we laid out the falsified data, the diverted funds, the faked permit, their faces shifted. Vince wasn't invited to the review. We wanted everything airtight before he could spin it. But he got wind anyway. Stormed into the office 2 days later like a reality show meltdown. Red face, spitting mad, shouting about sabotage and jealousy over my success. I stood calmly behind the reception desk as he screamed at Mike. You think people care about some yard workers? I'm the face of this company. Mike didn't even blink. You're about to be the face of a fraud investigation. Vince froze. What? Danny stepped out with a folder, placed it gently on the desk. Sign here to resign. Quietly, or we go public. His hands shook. You can't do this. Dad won't let you. At that exact moment, the front door opened, and in walked my father. No words, no ceremony. He just looked Vincent in the eye and said, Sit down. That day, Vince didn't sigh. Instead, he did what cowards do when cornered. He ran, packed his desk, vanished. No goodbye. Left behind his email, his file, his mess. It didn't matter, because the system had already been triggered. The tax attorney filed a whistleblower report with the IRS. The board sent notice of ethical breach. Vendors froze contracts. Licenses got flagged. And Vince? He had no idea what was still coming. But I did, because I wasn't done yet. Not until the story got rewritten the right way. And not until I saw what was hiding in Vince's office behind the cabinet. Inside a locked drawer, Danny found the key. And what we found inside changed everything. Danny slid the small brass key into the bottom drawer like he'd done it before. It clicked softly, a sound you'd almost miss, like a trigger being pulled in slow motion. He opened it, expecting paperwork, receipts, maybe a half bottle of whiskey or a stash of company pens. But what he found was a black leather portfolio, zipped shut, thick, heavy. He set it on the desk, looked at me, and said only one word. You ready? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We opened it slowly. Inside, a stack of letters handwritten, dated years back, not business correspondence. They were from my mother, to Vincent. And suddenly, my chest tightened. The first letter was dated 2002. I was 11. Vincent was 16. Dear Vincent, it began. I know your father is hard on you. I know sometimes you feel like you can never measure up. But I want you to remember, you are not just the smart one or the strong one. You are enough. Every letter was like that. Affectionate, encouraging, sometimes apologetic. But then came one that stopped me cold. It was dated 2 weeks after Vincent's car accident. Tony won't admit it, but he blames himself. He said he should have never let you drive that night. He's taking it out on Lucas, pushing him harder, holding him to higher standards. I worry he's transferring guilt, not healing from it. I dropped the page. My hands shook. All these years, I thought my father ignored me because I wasn't enough. Turns out, I was being punished for surviving. Danny reached the bottom of the portfolio and pulled out one last item. A thick manila envelope marked Private, Do Not Destroy. Inside were legal documents, signed contract, a memo, a hidden clause in the company's structure. Vincent hadn't just fumbled the reins. He'd forged an addendum, giving himself majority ownership, overriding the very clause our father thought protected me. It had been notarized by someone in Vegas. Fake address, shaky signature, a complete fraud. And yet, It had been enough to file with the board, just long enough to stage his takeover. It was no longer just betrayal. It was criminal conspiracy. I stared at that folder like it was fire in my lap. My breath came in shallow waves. This wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about landscaping, legacy, or favoritism. This was about justice, about rewriting a story that had been twisted into a lie on paper, in memory, in blood. We contacted our attorney. She confirmed it. The forged ownership change nullified all executive actions Vince had taken after the date of the fake addendum. Contracts, terminations, asset movements, everything was now a legal liability. And because he'd fled instead of facing the board, that made it worse. Intent to conceal, she explained. That's what prosecutors love to hear. She sent a formal complaint to the district attorney's office, included all the documentation, and told us to prepare for depositions. In the meantime, we had a business to run. True Roots had grown almost overnight. Clients left and right were ditching Greenline the moment they smelled smoke. We didn't even advertise, just word of mouth and quiet competence. One client said, "You were the reason I hired them in the first place." "I didn't realize until now." Another, "When you left, the soul of the work left too. We built patios, irrigation system, rooftop gardens for commercial buildings. But the most meaningful job, restoring the front yard of the old elementary school in South Sacramento, the one Dad used to mow for free in the 90s. This time, they paid. And I donated every dollar of that job to a vocational scholarship fund for kids who didn't want to go to college, but still wanted to build something. Then, one night, I got a call. Blocked number, Monsieur. Sir. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. Lucas. Vincent's voice. Hoarse. Humbled. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in days. I saw the complaint. The audit. The board led it. All of it. I said nothing. I didn't know it would go this far. My fingers clenched around the phone. You forged a legal document. Vince. I was scared, he said. Everything was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. You could have told the truth. He laughed bitterly. Dad never rewarded the truth. Silent. Then, softer. You're going to let them arrest me, aren't you? I stared at the spade hanging in my office. It gleamed under the warm ceiling light. I'm not letting anyone do anything, I said. You did this? You signed your name? The next morning, Danny found a note slipped under our office door. A single envelope, no return address. Inside, a flash drive. It contained emails, hundreds, between Vince and a shell contractor in Arizona. Invoices, wire transfers, evidence of tax evasion going back 3 years. It was a confession of sort, a digital white flag. We sent it to our attorney. She looked it over, grimaced, and said, "He's going to flip himself just to avoid federal time." The wheels were already turning. The DA's office reached out. A formal inquiry began. Deposition scheduled. And for the first time in this whole mess, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired, worn, but clear. Like when you finish digging a trench and finally see the water flow through smooth, steady, honest. But one more thing lingered, one last thread, a name. On the signature line of the forged clause, the Vegas notary, a woman named Angela Myers, a name I'd seen before. Because 10 years ago, she worked for my uncle, Dad's estranged brother, the one we were never allowed to talk about. And that meant only one thing. Vincent didn't act alone. When I saw the name Angela Myers, my stomach dropped. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade, but it hit me like a freight train. Angela used to do admin for Uncle Rick, the black sheep of the DeSantis clan, the man Dad cut ties with before I turned 15. No one ever told me why. Just that Rick was bad for business. A smooth-talking investor type who always had a project, but never any follow-through. The kind of man who wore designer shoes but couldn't keep his mortgage paid. The kind of uncle who showed up at weddings empty-handed, but left with a bottle of top-shelf scotch tucked in his jacket. And now his name was back. Tangled up in Vince's fraud. I knew I needed answers. I didn't tell my father at first. I drove 2 hours south to Merced, where Rick was rumored to be semi-retired. I found him at a real estate seminar in a strip mall conference room, talking to 6 disinterested retirees about smart land flipping. His hair was dyed too dark, and his teeth were whiter than any landscaper had business affording. When he saw me, his face flickered. He knew. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Why'd you help Vince forge the ownership clause? Rick blinked, then gave a slow smile, like I'd just complimented his shoes. Straight to the point. You always had that from your mom. I folded my arm. Answer the question. He shrugged. It was just a little paperwork. Angela owed me a favor. Vincent said it was temporary just until your dad came around. I clenched my fists. He stole a company. Rick leaned forward. Kid, you think this family ever ran on clean deal? Your dad's no saint. He just liked to pretend otherwise. I left before I did something I'd regret, but the anger boiled hot inside me, bleeding into everything I touched. That week, I worked like a man possessed. I laid stone by hand, personally drove to job sites, repaired 2 busted irrigation heads in the rain while Mike yelled at me to wear gloves. Because if the bloodline was this rotten, if this whole house of cards was built on backroom favors and fragile egos, then I was going to rebuild it from mud and sweat and truth. The legal case moved faster than expected. The DA filed formal charges against Vincent: tax evasion, wire fraud, falsification of business records. The banking violations alone were enough for probation. The forged contract, that carried jail time. He lawyered up, of course, tried to argue duress, blamed the toxic expectations of our father, said he was pressured to perform, that he panicked under legacy demands. The press ate it up. One article even called him a tragic golden child turned cautionary tale. I wanted to scream, but my attorney told me to stay quiet. No interviews, she said. Let the evidence speak. And it did, because one by one, the former clients came forward. Vendors, employees, people Vince burned and ghosted and lied to. And behind every accusation, there was one steady thread. Lucas was the one who did the work. My father finally confronted Rick. I wasn't there for it. But Mom told me he showed up on Rick's porch at 8 a.m., calm and silent. She said he didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just held out the original signed company charter and said, "You betrayed my sons. Both of them." Then he turned and walked away. Back at True Roots, we were busier than ever. 3 new municipal contracts, a college campus redesign. We even got a call from the mayor's office about a drought-resistant public garden pilot. And the symbol, that spade, still framed in my office. But now its image was our new logo. Simple, grounded, earned. Mike said it best. No suits, no gimmicks, just roots, steel, and sweat. One morning, I arrived early to find a letter taped to our front door. Handwritten, messy. It was from Vincent. Lucas, I don't know what happens next. My attorney says plea deals are on the table. I might leave the state, might disappear for a while, but I wanted to say something while I still could. You were always better than me. Not just smarter, not just tougher, but more real. People followed you because they trusted you. I always wanted that, but I faked it. You earned it. Dad didn't see it in time. I didn't either. I'm sorry. V. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the same manila folder that once held the forged contracts. Not because I forgave him, but because part of me understood. We weren't just 2 brothers fighting for a business. We were 2 boys raised under a man who didn't know how to love fairly. One of us broke under the pressure. The other, I bent. But I didn't shatter. Later that week, our team finished the city garden pilot. Raised bed, native plants, recycled water system, clean line, honest work. An older woman stopped by, cane in hand. "This yours?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "It's beautiful. My late husband would have loved it." He believed in second chances, too. I didn't ask questions. just smiled back. Sometime, the universe knows what you need to hear. But right when I thought it was over, just before the weight could lift for good, I got a call. Blocked number, static on the line, then a familiar voice. You think you've buried it all, don't you? Uncle Rin, you think you're safe now. But you never asked why I helped Vincent. The line went silent. Then, softly, ask your father about the first company, the one before DeSantis Landscaping. Click. I sat with the phone still in my hand, Uncle Rick's voice echoing in my ear like smoke that wouldn't clear. Ask your father about the first company. Not DeSantis Landscaping. Something before. It wasn't curiosity that burned in me. It was dread, because whatever he was hinting at, it wasn't just business. It was legacy. And I'd just rebuilt mine from the ashes. I drove to my parents' place that night. Didn't call. Just showed up. Mom met me at the door. She didn't ask questions. Just nodded toward the backyard. Dad was out there, sitting on the porch, polishing an old pair of pruning shears like it was 1987 again. Rick called, I said. He didn't look up. He said there was a company before DeSantis Landscaping. My father didn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, he said, it was called Redwood and Clay. He took a breath so deep it shook his chest. Rick and I started it together. Back in '79, fresh out of high school. Just a couple of kids with a truck and a dream. Redwood and Clay. The name alone sounded like something out of an Americana postcard. But what came next wasn't so quaint. We did good work, Dad said. Got city contracts. Real client. We were solid. Then what happened? He stared at the spade stuck in the planter beside him, his old one. The real one. Rick started cutting corners, paying guys off the books, using recycled concrete, faking materials, shorting hours. I felt my hands curl into fists. He forged my signature on a city contract, Dad said. Got caught. The city blacklisted us. We lost our licenses. The business collapsed. Why didn't you press charges? Because he was my brother. He looked at me now, really looked at me. I walked away. Changed the name. Started over. I swore I'd never let greed rot something I built ever again. I swallowed hard. So you buried it. He nodded. But Rick never stopped being Rick. He just waited for a new host. And Vincent? Dad's face crumpled. Just slightly. He had charm. Ambition. The stuff I thought I lacked. I thought if I gave him a shot, maybe he could rewrite the family name. But you already did, I said quietly. I didn't know that until too late. That night, we didn't solve anything. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there. Two men trying to find peace in the ruins of what they both tried to build. Months passed. Vincent took a deal restitution, probation, mandatory ethics counseling, no prison. The DA didn't want headline. They wanted compliance. He left California. Last I heard, he was working at a rental yard in Flagstaff. Fitting, in a way. Still around tools. Still surrounded by dirt. But no one's name on the truck but the owner's. True Roots thrived. We hired veterans. Young dad. Single moms looking for steady hours. Grew slow. Grew honest. Our mission statement was simple. Integrity in the ground beneath your feet. The city named us Green Contractor of the Year. And during the awards ceremony, they handed me a plaque. But I didn't hang it. Instead, I placed it next to the framed spade in the office. Because awards fade. But symbols keep you straight. One day, I was walking past our old Green Line office, now empty. For lease sign on the window. I saw someone standing inside. Back turned, hands in pockets. It was Vincent. He was staring at the same desk we fought over for years. The same window he once shouted through at Mike. The same cabinet he hid everything in. I didn't go in. Just kept walking. Some wars are better left quiet. So why tell this story? Why drag it all into the light? Because someone out there, maybe you, is fighting your own family ghost. Maybe it's a sibling who got all the praise. A parent who never saw your work. A partner who bet against you. And maybe you're tired of swallowing rage, of playing nice, of wondering if doing the right thing even matters. I'm here to tell you, it does. But not because it makes you rich, not because the world clap. It matters because you'll know. You'll know you stood in the storm and didn't bend. You'll know the ground beneath your feet is solid, not because someone handed it to you, but because you laid it yourself. One stone at a time, one root at a time, with calloused hands and a heart that refused to rot. If this story struck something inside you, leave a comment. Share your own moment of being overlooked or rising from it. And if you're still in the middle of your battle, you're not alone. Hit subscribe. More stories are coming, real ones, because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just finishing the job they said you couldn't handle.